Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of the Bookham Nook Show. My name is Kyle Colley and this is a special episode of Creators Talk Podcast, a podcast for book conversations with your favorite bookish content creators. This episode is brought to you by Bookham, the book community's new and best way to host dynamic online book clubs. Download the app and start your book club today at www.bookhamapp.com. Join our community where bookish conversations happen. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. My guest today is the astute creator according to Alina. Alina is a writer, an educator, and a lover of Dante's Inferno. She has 2 literary degrees and got her master's at the University of Oxford. Her content ranges from everything from overcompensation to commentary on online book culture. She was born in Romania, raised in Italy, and baptized by fire in London. Alina, welcome to the Creators Talk Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Perfect. Yeah, I read, so I want to kind of start with your writing. I read your article, How to Love Yourself. Could you tell us a little bit about your childhood and what were some of the most important aspects of your life growing up?
Yeah, sure. So as you already said, I was born in Romania, very, very small town, and soon after moved to an even smaller village where my grandparents lived. When I was about 7 years old, my mom started working in Italy on like a seasonal contract. She worked in a restaurant. And my sister and I were basically raised by our grandparents. And then at the end of 8th grade, the end of middle school, basically, my mom made the decision that we would move to Italy, which is where we went next. And I went to high school there. Graduated high school, and then moved to London to do whatever it is that people do in London. I worked for a while doing various odd jobs, and then eventually decided I always thought I was going to go to university and do some sort of higher education, humanities related higher education, but I wasn't really sure what I would end up doing, and it is extremely expensive. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take some time off. I'm going to work. I'm going to save some money, and then eventually decided on this comparative literature course at UCL, University College London. And yeah, I guess the reoccurring theme in my life, although I've been in London for 11 years now, it has been moving around. That's kind of the one striking thing. I am a person of many places, I guess.
That's very cool. And how was Italy? So what part did you grow up, or were you during what area of Italy were you in? How was reading, and how did that play a part in your life in that stage of your life?
That is an interesting question. We moved to a town called Pistoia, which is about a 45-minute train ride from Florence in Tuscany. Very cute, very picturesque medieval town, with history and kind of where the Dante obsession started. And it was an interesting experience. I really enjoyed high school there. Essentially the way their education system is structured, you have to choose like a profile. So you either do like a scientific course of studies, or a humanities, or foreign languages, or an arts related thing. So it kind of already sets you up for picking a specific university, for better or worse. People have different opinions about this. But yeah, I chose the sort of foreign language road, and that meant that I got to study literature in various different languages. So that kind of shaped what I would end up doing, and like my opinions about the way thought circulates around the world. And obviously now with globalization and social media and whatever, it's not exactly the 19th century anymore where you just exchange letters with your mates from France or Germany or Italy. But it did open my eyes to a lot of things that I never considered before, mostly because Romania had this history of dictatorship and isolationism, but also because I was from this like tiny rural community. So I hadn't encountered culture from other places before that. So yeah, it was definitely it's like foundational experience for me. Culturally, obviously a bit of a shock, like I'm somewhere else. And this was all happening in 2008. Italy as a country, like most European countries, had its own struggle with racism and xenophobia and whatever. So it wasn't smooth sailing, but I was fortunate in that any type of microaggression I encountered was then balanced by just amazing friends and community. So I think I had it very easy and was super privileged in that way. So
yeah, I think the cool thing about watching your content is that when you, at least from a viewer's perspective, we can see that you're pulling from different backgrounds and ideas, whether it's the influence you're talking about from Romania or Italy. So to get a little bit more into reading culture in these different places, what books were big? Because at least when, like, from American culture, like the books that were in our schooling was Great Gatsby, Frankenstein, To Kill a Mockingbird, Catcher in the Rye. What were some of those books that were ingrained into the culture there?
Yeah, I guess in Romania, I didn't really get that far along into the like literary education. In fact, I have an older sister who finished high school in Romania, and she's like, "You are the most educated, undereducated Romanian person ever." Because the foundational novels, I have not read many of them. I'm currently reading Moara cu noroc. The translation would be The Lucky Mill, or The Mill of Good Luck, which is this like 19th century novella based in some village where this young couple take over like a local inn. They become innkeepers, but then there's a whole mafia in the area, so they're like struggling against the sort of organized crime and oppression of that region, which is very interesting. But it kind of reminds me in a way, of the sort of the Italian novel that you read in high school as an Italian student, which is I Promessi Sposi, translation The Betrothed, which is about these two young people who really want to get married. They're in love, they want to get married, but then this local Don falls in love with this girl, or in love, like he wants her because she's gorgeous, right? And she won't have him. So the next best thing is to just make it impossible for them to get married. So, and it's like a, however many 100 pages book about their trials and tribulations. So it's interesting how there are these commonalities across European cultures and beyond Europe. Of course, there's a huge history of colonization and European countries taking their own genres and narrative motifs and themes and stuff elsewhere, and then people in those countries starting to sort of trying to imitate European writing just so that they can get recognized. So yeah, it's interesting to like read across cultures and be like, so these people who have never spoken, that had never been to each other's countries, were thinking more or less about similar things around the same time. It really like shows you what zeitgeist is and why, sometimes you like find yourself having a thought and then somebody says it 2 days later online and you're like, oh my God, how did they, are our phones listening to us? And chances are that they are, but also chances are that we're all experiencing a cultural moment and responding to it in similar ways because we're all human, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, go ahead.
Another thing that I thought about when you're asking me this, like the foundational books, it is funny that you should ask that because I often will speak to people about reading and stuff and they're like, oh, have you read such and such? Have you read, for example, I have not read Paradise Lost. Okay, don't shoot me. And they're like, what? You haven't read Paradise Lost? I'm like, okay, calm down. I wasn't here when you guys were studying that in school. It's not everybody's greatest work of art, okay? Different countries have their own people. Shocking, I know, but it's not all about UK and US writing.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And even when you're talking, we say it a lot on our podcast, on the founders one specifically, but what's most personal is most general. And I think when we talk about human lifestyle, although we may be from different parts of the world, we still sometimes go through similar struggles, where it's even if it's personal, whether it's cultural, whether, as you said, when it comes to xenophobia or anything, there's these things that tend to be constants wherever you kind of move. So there are those moments of real humanity that we get to connect over. And speaking of that, like when it comes to your content, what inspired you first to get into book content creation online? How has your journey been, and how kind of have you played into all these things that make you who you are as a content creator?
I mean, it started like well, actually, I don't know if that's how most people get started. I think there is now an increasing awareness that you can be a content creator and do that for a living and do it quite successfully in all sorts of niches, including the book niche. But I think that I just I started an Instagram account like in 2018.
Okay.
I'd started university like 6 months prior, and I needed a little bit of a project. I had just had a horrendous breakup, and I was like, oh, well, what am I going to do with all this energy? So I started a book account, of course, as you do. And then that didn't really go anywhere for me. I had, my people, my followers, my community, but then it wasn't until 2022 when I decided I would start the Dante Book Club that I started getting some attention, like thousands of followers. And then a year after that, I started making video essays in a more like serious way. I think it's coming up to, I made a video in March 2023 that got some attention, but it wasn't until sort of around this time, October, that I was like, I should probably focus on this and give it the energy that it deserves. And I think the motivation between that was just, I love a yap session. I do enjoy talking, in case you haven't noticed. And just, I think it's such a great medium. And YouTube being a search engine as well, really, if you put some thought and research into your content and get lucky, of course, but also play the sort of search keyword game, you are likely to get some people's attention, and if you're even luckier, you might even keep it. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. It started a bit, not as intentional as I would have liked. I feel like my advice for anybody who wants to start would be just to start and continue to make stuff, even if you're not getting huge results, to begin with at least. But it is such an incredible tool for people who have things to say but might not know where to say it, or whose other type of writing doesn't really get picked up by publications and whatever. Just publish it yourself. You don't need permission. You don't need a gatekeeper to tell you, okay, yeah, this is worth putting out there into the world.
Yeah, that's spot on. And your videos are well researched and well thought out. Do you do scripting, or are you mostly just thinking and talking? How do you kind of plan your videos, especially for those more commentary videos?
Yeah, commentary videos, definitely a lot of research and scripting happens for various reasons. One, I can waffle, I can go on tangents. It's just sort of human nature. You say one thing and then you remember another thing, and then and another thing. And it can be, I enjoy listening to people in that who have that style of speaking or sort of conversation on podcasts and stuff like that. Just like two best friends just talking is like my favorite format ever. But I do understand that that's not always the easiest to follow, and I'm trying to make things as easy to follow as possible, I think. And also another reason is it is the internet and you have to be highly specific and sort of qualify most things that you're saying because you don't want to be misinterpreted or misunderstood, and sometimes that's inevitable. But I genuinely, beyond like people looking for things to be upset about on the internet, I would never want to hurt anybody's feelings. So I like to make sure that what I'm saying makes sense and that I am being mindful of more than just people like myself.
Yeah. When you first got into content creation in the book space, you're talking about you tended to do more classics like Dante, as you said. And then also there's this whole other side of BookTube that does, you might see Colin Hoover and all these other different books. How did you, as a content creator, did you think like, oh, should I go into this lane, or did you say this is my style, this is what I know? How'd you kind of balance those two areas as a creator coming in?
Yeah, I think again, if you want to make content, you have to be consistent if you are trying to get somewhere with it. And you can't be consistent about things that don't really interest you. So I think the decision-making process there was literally just like, I want to be successful. If I'm going to be successful, I want it to be for things that I personally think are interesting. One, because it does come across in the videos, I think. If you're talking about something that you genuinely don't care about, then you're not going to be as engaging a speaker, I think, unless you're a great actor, in which case, good for you. And also because I don't want to sit down and hate what I'm doing day to day. I've done that in other jobs before, so I would rather not have to do it here. And I assume that for most people, content creation starts as a sort of side thing. Either you're still in school and this is a hobby that you have, or you're working full time and this is a sort of side hustle. So again, being super interested in the things that you're talking about does help make it or keep it as interesting and exciting and hobby-like as possible for as long as possible.
Yeah, of course. And then through that, have you been able to jump into different genres that you otherwise wouldn't have read just from, being in community with a lot of different types of readers?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely take myself far less seriously as a reader now. I think coming from like my academic background, which again, like a lot of, and this is something that I try to get across in some of my videos, some of the smartest, most academically successful people I've met at UCL, at Oxford, are very, very silly people, and they don't sit around being like, oh, what are you reading? Romance? Oh, that's awful. Like nobody cares. Right. They don't care. They will find that interesting. And again, if you're an interesting person, you're able to find a lot of different things interesting. So yeah, coming from that background, I went into it thinking, oh, I want to be like the super intellectual, distinguished type of reader. And in many ways, I am. I had to be. Like I read stuff. I wrote dissertations. Like you have to have academic rigor in order to do those things. But that doesn't mean that I can't enjoy a silly little romance. Now, admittedly, the genre and some of the people in it have a lot to be criticized for. But I do think that ever since being on Instagram and making real life friends with people on Instagram or on YouTube, I've become a little bit more like, oh yeah, I can see why this is fun. It's not something that I'm going to read every single day, but every now and then, yeah, sure. I mean, it has a place, right? And in that sense, for sure, I think I've loosened up a little bit more.
Yeah, and speaking of that, kind of the way you make videos, can you talk a little bit about bookish video journalism? Because I don't know a better way to say it, or at least your commentary and understanding the book world better. How do you think about, because you talk about things from BookTok to overconsumption to underconsumption. You have all these different things that make it applicable both ways, like as you're kind of saying. So how do you think about the importance of those conversations in the book world?
I think it's I think it's important to come to the publishing industry and to academia with the most nuanced possible position, and sort of understand the business side of publishing and book creation and book consumption, and also the sort of moral aspects or the moral associations that we make with being a reader and being like an intellectual online and all these things. I think there's room for conversation about everything. And I think my approach to all of the topics that I talk about is literally that. Like, this is just a conversation. And obviously I'm presenting my opinions. I have to have an argument, like video essay or just normal essay. Like, what's the point? You have to have a point to what you're saying, or it has to be going somewhere. But I do try to convey to the audience, people who watch me all the time, whose names I recognize, and just the occasional person, that like, this is just my opinion, and these are some observations, and you are free to disagree with me politely, if possible, in the comments, and that we're just sitting around and talking, and I'm not telling you how to live your life or what to believe about things. I'm just discussing things that I've noticed. And, we can have a back and forth, or you can just take what I'm saying and be like, oh, this is great research, great content creation, great commentary, no questions asked. I'm going to now appropriate this opinion as my own and repeat it to my friends and family. Or you can watch 2 minutes and be like, she has no idea what she's talking about. Click on to the next thing. And that's fine. Those are all normal responses. But I do think that one thing that is missing from the internet in general, and more recently from sort of the book space online as well, is nuance and like conversation where we're all just being sort of normal about a topic, not just like we either love or loathe a specific thing. Like, it's normal, it's okay to be indifferent.
Yeah, I
think, or think, oh, Colleen Hoover, not my cup of tea, but whatever, and move on with your day. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, you're right, because we talk about that a lot at Bookham. It's this idea of just having those, because I think when you have audio, like how we are having right back and forth, there's a sense of you can see someone's whole point, where if it's a video sometimes, unless it's long form, say it's just like a 30-second clip, you may not get the whole understanding of why someone really enjoys this book. You get the emotion for why they love the book, but you don't get the nuance in that. So books are being consumed at a faster pace, but they're not always being talked about and appreciated in the same way. So we really, I agree with you, and a lot of what you're saying is that idea of when we come to a table and have these conversations, then there's this whole picture that happens. And what I really enjoy about your videos is that you just bring the conversation to people to then, because then you go look in the comments and there's like all these people having, oh, I like when you said this part or that part, or I thought about this. Now there's a whole community that's being built around something that people may have thought about, but have never been able to articulate in the way that your videos kind of have done for a lot of people.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice of you to say.
Yeah, of course. And one of the comments I noticed, and I just wanted to talk about something, someone said there's a pressure to like around reading, like what you read, how much you read, why. So I wanted to ask you, like, why do you think reading is held to a higher standard compared to other mediums, like when it comes to this? I know it's part of its intellectualism that people want to be seen as a smart person, but even when it comes to how we critique books is very different now. Like the way we leave reviews is not the same way as we might do with like movie and TV. So I'm just curious, like, how do you feel about that when it comes to comparison of this art form as well as other ones?
Yeah. Well, yeah, as you say, the most obvious answer to that is the sort of association and the status and the socioeconomic background associated with being a well-read person, and just simply the fact that, you know, until not very long ago, there weren't very many people of color or working class people doing literature degrees or working in publishing, and this is like an ongoing battle, right? The lack of diversity in academia and um, publishing and the arts in general. So you have this idea when you say that somebody is a guy who enjoys reading, he's like a literary guy, you immediately picture a sort of young Hugh Grant in his like floppy hair to the side, shirt, semi-high-waisted trousers, with a little book bag by his side, sort of running his fingers through his hair and looking in the most attractive way possible, just tortured and pensive. And this, I think this mental image, the fact that it brings something sort of dark academia-like to mind, does play a role in the way that we fetishize and glorify the idea of reading and being like a bookish person. But I think also it just kind of, because you mentioned film and TV, there is this association of television. Obviously now we have prestige television and all of these extremely well done shows. Television used to be for the masses, right? So there is also this elitism related to the ease of interaction with that media form. So reading a book, you know, it takes time, it takes determination, you have to lay aside all distractions. It takes discipline in a way that it is, you know, something to be proud of, getting through a book rather than just sitting there on the sofa and waiting for a movie to pass you by. Not that you don't interact with movies or TV series, but it's just slightly, it's a different mental space that you have to be in. It requires a lot more out of you to be a reader than to be a viewer.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense as well, there is some pride in being somebody who does difficult things or aspirational things. And then it's just simply, there is a tradition of writing that goes back millennia, right? So obviously that is kind of the art form that gets maybe sort of gets this status above all others. Not that, you know, painting or sculpture or whatever haven't been around as much, but they're more related to the senses rather than the intellect. No, but I think it's, you know, it's a combination of things. It's not just sort of social status or cultural capital, or it's all of these things together wrapped up in what we now have on social media in the form of the reading aesthetic and all the discourse surrounding that.
Yeah, and I was gonna say to that point, especially when it comes to like the studious and how people think about like well read used to be how you're kind of explaining how people think like this person's well read, but now like well read is on like if you look on BookTok, there's people that read 100 books a year. They might be romance, it might be fantasy, but that's also well read, and it's that nuance of the reading aesthetic that's kind of has transpired over time. So when it comes to that idea of what you're saying, it has changed in certain instances.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about this as like being a well-read person in the sense that you sit with what you have read and you digest it and you like think about it and try to figure out new layers of meaning in it. as opposed to well-read as in I read 100 books this week. I don't know if that's possible, but it's an exaggeration. Yeah, I mean, what does it mean to be a well-read person? One of my former teachers would say.
I wanted to go kind of into that too. Like, how do you feel about long form content versus short form? Because there's two arts to it. How do you go about each one?
Yeah, this is interesting. I was recently speaking to some of my friends because I am considering being more active on TikTok because I do think there's a place for short form content. I think that obviously mindless scrolling is not great. Not for our attention spans, it's just not a good way to intake information. I recently came across, I forget the term, but there is some sort of dopamine-like hormonal release when you find new information that you think is useful. That has nothing to do with whether you've internalized the information, whether it's actually useful to you. It just makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you're learning.
Yeah.
So scrolling through TikToks that tell you interesting facts about the world, it will make you feel good more than in this mindless social media consumption way. It does make you feel like you're doing something productive, but it doesn't actually result in productive action in your life necessarily. Or maybe you're internalizing some of that information, maybe not, who knows. But I do think that aside, consumed responsibly, something like little TikToks about various things can be useful, and there is a place for it in the world and in the way we communicate knowledge to one another. There are so many weird and wonderful things that I've learned via TikTok. There's this woman who specializes in teaching people how to clean and care for their leather goods, like bags and wallets and stuff. And I think that's super useful because we're constantly throwing shit away. Sorry, can we swear?
Yeah, you're good. Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So I was super happy to come across that. I was like, oh my God, yeah, you can do that. It'll look so much nicer after. That's useful to me. And all sorts of things that are super interesting and super niche and things that you wouldn't think about. And the Dante Book Club kind of show that to me, that there is an appetite for things that are a little bit weird, that people might be intimidated to tackle by themselves, but having somebody with some sort of expertise is encouraging and also makes it easier to get through. I do personally, I prefer long form content because I do go on. And I enjoy it when other people do also. And I enjoy going into the various minutia and interesting things and tangents about a topic to have a comprehensive understanding of that thing and other things related to it, because we do be living in a system where a network of things, where you're talking about the publishing industry and suddenly you're talking about oppression or liberation and things that you didn't think you would get to from the initial conversation. And as you say, I do think that they are different things. There's a different art to both of them. It's one thing to talk about whatever when you have a viewer who is prepared to sit down for half an hour or have you talk in the background while they're doing something else, and another to capture and keep the attention of a person who is constantly going to the next thing, and I think there's a lot of skill to that. If you manage to do that without doing embarrassing things for shock value, then good for you. You're probably a very good speaker.
Yeah, and what I've noticed, and I don't think there's no right way or wrong way. I have noticed that long form content creators tend to be able to build really strong communities because people have sat with them longer. So it's kind of like that, just like you bond with them over a long period of time. Like if you go listen to some podcasters, they become like your favorite person because you feel like you've known them for so long. But I think short form has a strong place that if you can can knock it out, then you will be able to hit such a zeitgeist that you can change certain things in the culture very quickly, because people were like, whoa, that changed this, or I thought about this. You think about things. Well, I think her name was Risa Tisha. Like, I remember she blew up. And I guess long form though, right?
Yes.
Even though it was a TikTok, she made those long form. But
I watched all, whatever it was, 60,
really?
70 of them.
Yeah.
I was like, girl, who the fuck did we marry? This man sounds insane.
So it's so interesting what works. Yeah.
100%. And I do also think that sometimes, and I'm experiencing this as a content creator, I sit down and I get an idea and I'm like, oh, this would be so interesting. And I'm like halfway through trying to make a little plan for myself, and I realize, like, this is not a video essay. This is just a thought, you know? And it could be like a 1 minute, 2 minute long TikTok, and it would be an interesting nugget of a conversation to have. So there's, like I say, there's definitely a place for short form content. I do think that, unfortunately, short form tends to go viral more because sound bites, you know, it's easy consumption. It will become a meme. You don't often see like a video essay become fodder for meme culture. And memes, you know, whether you like them or not, that is kind of, you've become a meme, you've made it, for better or worse.
It's so interesting what really wins, because I think they both really affect culture in different ways. Because you even think, really kind of off topic, but even like a Cat Williams with Shannon Sharp, that was the biggest interview of the year, and that's 2-hour interview, right? So like that's a long form thing. But then, as we said, there's things that are just cultural moments through short form. So I think there is a balance to it. And what you said is really great perspective, where if you think it's a long form content, but you start doing the thinking process and you're like, this is more maybe a second, you think that could be really a smart way to how to go into short form. I do want to kind of switch into a little bit. There's a lot of things that go on in the book world, and as we kind of talked about it, how do you decide what's worth commenting on and what's like versus what you ignore? Because there's so many things that there's drama that comes around. There's like think about which ones you choose to do long form on.
Yeah, I think for me, it goes back again to, is this something that I genuinely find interesting? And it is a bit of a negotiation to make, and a conversation that you have to make with yourself, because it's sometimes, you know, that like, oh, this is going to get views. And obviously you are kind of, I mean, I try not to, but even like the strongest person out there will find it difficult to say no to like growth. We are such a numbers-based society, and probably more than ever before with social media and stuff. So you do want views, and you want success, and you want to have like a growing audience to have conversations with. And sometimes a topic that you might not be the most passionate about might bring new people to you. And then you think, you know, well, then I'll have the conversation that I want to have later on, once the audience is here. That doesn't always work, in my opinion. People will always want to see more of what they came to you for. So I think, again, if I were to give advice, it would be do that sparingly. I think for me, I do enjoy a little bit of drama. I can be messy. I do enjoy a little bit of, I forget her name. There's a creator who does like authors behaving badly series, which I find very interesting. Then with Cindy, a huge YouTube channel, she sometimes does sort of drama recaps of what's going on in the industry. And I enjoy watching that type of content. I appreciate the work that they put into this. It's not really my thing. Like I enjoy somebody else talking about it. I feel like me scripting that and then editing it, I would be bored by the end of it. So it's not really my thing. And also I prefer talking about things that are neither good or bad, and it's more like somewhere in the middle, and we can discuss why it's in the middle, and why it's good and why it's bad, and everybody can make a choice for themselves, as to what their final opinion is. I'm only like outlining the various arguments. I don't really want to be telling people what to think. Like, I'm kind of sort of hoping that what an audience takes away is like a framework for how to think about things.
Yeah,
maybe.
that's well said. And speaking of that, you had two videos that kind of go into this. There's an overconsumption and an underconsumption in the book space. Where do you personally fall on that side of the spectrum as a reader?
Well, I did say in the underconsumption video, between my partner and I'm pretty sure, because we recently moved house, I had to pack everything. We have like 20 plus worth of boxes worth of books. Maybe I want to say, to be conservative, around 700. So I'm not saying don't have any books. But what I'm talking about more specifically when it comes to overconsumption and underconsumption is like doing things, reading books out of a anxiety that you're not well read enough, or that you haven't done enough, or that everybody's doing more than you, and like living with the stress of that. And also buying stuff for how it looks in a video. Somebody left a comment referring to the fact that we talk about like consumption in relation to books and art and stuff, and they said something like, oh, what is with this language? Like, we don't it's not something that books are not something that you eat, it's not something that you consume in that way. And they are right. I don't know if this person is, I don't know what they identify as, but this person is right? Like, yes, of course, it's crazy that we use the word to consume for art. But we are interacting with art at such a accelerated pace because of this constant buy on social media, that we are kind of consuming it. It's very like disposable, like single use. And I mean, I guess some books can be single use, like you read it once, maybe you like it, maybe you don't. Not everything has to stay with you for your entire life. Some art can just be entertainment, and that's fine. But the pace at which we interact with art is very much giving consumer behavior, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was talking to Jennifer Baker. She's been in publishing for like 20 years, and she was talking about how much publishing has changed in the amount of books that are coming out. That's why I think there is this, even if you sometimes try not to be overconsumption, especially as you grow as a content creator, you're always getting hit with, hey, I'm going to give you this advanced reader copy.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm giving you this. Can you talk about that? Next thing you know, you're looking at your room and you say, I got so many books and I have to do so much promotion, that you do become, in a lot of ways, you do overconsume, but it's not in the way kind of what we've been talking about, where it's like we're breaking down books, we're having conversations about them. It's more of a, I just have a lot of books. Like, he's like, I may not get to some of these, but
yeah,
I have a lot of them.
And that's fine if this is your job or a side hustle or a part of your life in a significant way. But I think the way everything gets sort of cutesified and aestheticized and sort of objectified as a background in a video or as like pretty pictures, it does sort of send a message to people who have normal professions that have nothing to do with books and who just read as a hobby, that this is something that you must own to call yourself a reader. And I don't like the way that there's a whole merchification of the book space as well. Like, yeah, I'll have my gadget, I have a book, I have a t-shirt, a quote, or like a portrait that I wear of my favorite writer. You know, I have a Dante tattoo. 100% understand what it means to be a fan of something and to want some paraphernalia to go with that. But there is a lot of stuff that comes with books nowadays, especially more in the fantasy series space, where you have the posters and the little mini figurines and the pillows and the thing, and it gets to a point where it's not high quality product, because the people who are producing them are not making something that will last you a lifetime, right? It's just, this is the thing that is popular right now, let me produce some sort of Temu Shein quality gadget to sell now while it's hot, you know?
You brought up a good point in your video. I forget who it was, but you talked about this the celebrity that ended up buying a whole library worth of books just to say, "Hey, I read, by the way," or at least I have it else.
Yeah, that was Ashley Tisdale. And I did feel bad for, like, well, I always feel bad when I mention anybody in a video, because I don't want that person to become a target of anything. But that, I thought it was illustrating this idea that, oh, well, people are coming to film my house. My bookshelves can't possibly be like a work in progress. They must be already full because I am a reader and I must present that idea to the world, which is kind of ironic.
Do you think that BookTok played a very big role in that too? Because I think there's a sense of BookTok blew up so much that people feel like they want to jump into books even if they weren't really into them, because they see that it's where the puck is moving. I'm curious to hear how you think about that even too.
Yeah, for sure. I think that BookTok played a huge role. I don't think necessarily that that's a bad thing, right?
No.
More people than ever are reading and writing. That is a net positive in my view. But the way it's sort of bite-size content about a type of art that is supposed to be sat with and digested for much longer than a sort of 30 to 60-second video. And again, and this is not just TikTok related, it is obviously had been going around for much longer than that. And I think also something that TikTok has done is just amplified behaviors and things that were already there. The haul culture on TikTok is the issue for me. I don't think it's necessary to show 20 plus books unboxing every other week. That's just not humanly possible. I do not, if you tell me that you've read all of those books, I'm not going to contradict you, because it's none of my business to like check what people are doing, but I simply do not believe you. Like I'm going to be like, okay, sure. It's not, and it's the type of content that gets lots of views because we enjoy, I don't know, I'm sure somebody has studied this somewhere, but something happens in our brain when we see like large quantities of neatly organized items. We've seen this with like house tours, kitchen pantry tours, makeup collection tours. Like everybody loves to see huge amount of products, tidy, color coordinated. I don't know what it is. We kind of go crazy over that.
Yeah, that and just the unboxing, because I don't know, people just enjoy to see what you got.
Yeah.
And the book hauls got big on YouTube too. I remember that was kind of early. They kind of started there.
For sure.
Always been there. Yeah, it's just something interesting that's a part of book culture, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to switch because we talk about culture a lot here on this podcast. How do you approach community and engaging with your audience and just kind of that whole part of your brand, specifically when it comes to even like how you did your book club with Dante and all that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I feel like everybody does it in a little bit different, like in whichever way feels normal and natural to them. I sort of toe the line between being an oversharer and sort of keeping it to the topics that I'm talking about, and not a lot of my content is about me as a person. It's more about like topics, right? And that's kind of the thing that I enjoy about sort of commentary content as opposed to daily vlogging and more sort of personality content, because I don't, not that people won't get personal in the comments if somebody disagrees with you suddenly. It's not that you have a view that they don't enjoy, is that you are a bad person. There's no in between.
Right? There's no nuance.
Yeah. But I do enjoy interacting with people despite that. And you do get better at, well, actually, I don't want to speak for everybody who makes content. For me, I have over the past year become better at just dismissing things that I simply know not to be true about myself in the comments. And the people who do engage in good faith are very interesting. I learn a lot of stuff just from reading the comments. Like, I'll say one thing and then somebody's like, well, actually related to that, here's this like 500-word dissertation about a related topic that I find interesting. And they're right, it is very interesting. So that is super cool. I enjoy community. I think it is sometimes difficult to, I was actually talking to my partner about this recently. There's a difference between everybody enjoys saying that they want to build community, but really what they want is an audience. And I respect that. You can't possibly reply to every single person, but there is a difference between you saying something and then people commenting and you not engaging back, and you sort of taking the time to speak to people. And it is something that I try to do whenever somebody DMs me on Instagram. I'm on Instagram quite a bit. And I'm the type of person who can't stand to have like a little notification in. So I have to open all the messages. And once I've opened them, I can't not reply. Like, who does that? So I do have interesting conversations with people via Instagram. When I was doing the Dante book club also, it was like 1,500 people. It wasn't, compared to now, it was easier to respond to everyone. And yeah, I think there's a fine line between being very involved in your community and becoming parasocial back. And I'm trying not to encourage parasocial relationships that are unhealthy for both parties. But to like I would genuinely like to continue being able to speak to people in this like very open and sort of mutually beneficial way, because I'll say things online and I really appreciate that people feel like they're learning something or getting something out of my content, but I do also get a lot back, and it's not just like validation. It's actual like knowledge. A lot of the people who watch my content are clearly very educated and knowledgeable people, so I'm grateful that they share with me as well.
That's well said, and thank you for that. I want to talk to you about your writing. Can you talk just a little bit about your what's your writing process like?
For YouTube or?
Let's start with your blog or YouTube, either one, kind of how you think about writing in general.
Yeah, I think YouTube is the more, so before doing YouTube, I was in journalism for a couple of years. So it's very much like I see something or somebody says something and I'm like, that's interesting. Is it true? Let's see. And then some research happens and then I form my own thoughts and I write it down. And it's very much in the style of like an essay that I would write at university, just this is the question, this is how I'm answering it, and this is why I believe what I believe. When it comes to more creative writing, it really depends. I'm trying to make it less of a mood-based inspiration strikes type of process and more of a, okay, it's a practice. We sit here every single day. We try to come up with thoughts. We make sure that we write some words so that we flex that muscle. And I do have a lot of friends who are either writers themselves or editors, agents, etc. And everybody says the same thing. It's a muscle. You have to sit down. You have to do it every single day. You are not a genius. Nobody is. Just keep practicing, even when you feel like everything you write is stupid. So that kind of is the process. I think with newsletters in my blog, my Substack, it is a little bit, I haven't published anything in a while because for a while I was writing things that were far too personal. And I'm like, I feel like this is for me. This is just for me. It's not, we should, sometimes I go on the internet and I'm like, we should all know less about each other. I feel like it's okay to not share sometimes. But even then, it is, if I have something slightly more controversial to say that I don't want to put in a YouTube video, I'll put it on my newsletter. And the people who follow me there know me enough to not be super offended by everything that I have to say. Not that I ever say offensive things, but you just never know.
Yeah.
And when it comes to more sort of creative fiction and stuff like that, it is a lengthier thing. I journal every single day, almost. I have diaries which will be burned before I die because they are pathetic. But sometimes, you're just sort of stream of consciousnessing yourself into something, and that might be worth a thread that might be worth pulling at. I have a couple of creative writing things going on. One of them is a novel. I did a writing course recently, and the first session was the person guiding the course and the workshops forcing us to say, it's not a project, it's not a thing that you're working on, it's a novel, just call it a novel. So I'm practicing that right now. Just sort of trudging through a first draft. And the process there is very much that trying and sometimes failing to make it like a daily practice.
Oh yeah. We won't go into it, but tell us the genre. I would say, do we know what genre it is?
Yeah, I think it's sort of commercial, semi-literary fiction. I think literary, but also like sort of dark humor. Somebody recently called it uplit, but there's not. Well, it's like there's a comedic voice to the narration, but I wouldn't say it's uplifting in any way. I think actually, the more I read it, the more I think I'm choosing, because there's a semi-happy ending, and there's a sort of disastrous ending, and I think I'm leaning towards the bad thing.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it's gonna be great watching all your video and your content.
Oh, thank you.
Let's get into your reading preferences as we kind of wrap up. What's the last book you read? What are you currently reading, and what's next for you to read?
I just finished. So I am reading this Romanian thing, Ioan Slavic, big 19th century Romanian writer. He writes a lot about sort of shepherds and countryside people, and my grandparents were farmers, or are. One of them is still alive. So I grew up around a lot of animal herding and waking up at the crack of dawn to go plow the land and all of this stuff that sounds insane now that I've lived in London for. It sounds out of a different century, but such as Eastern Europe, I guess. I'm enjoying that a lot. And then I just recently finished Gone Girl.
Ooh, okay.
Which I buy a lot of books in charity shops, and since we moved, there's new charity shops in the area to explore, and I found it, and I was like, oh, I've always wanted to read this because I've seen the movie, and there's a whole cult following of the female protagonist. So I was like, oh, I always wanted to see how it compares, and one of my interests is this sort of adaptation, like text to screen or text to stage, and it is just very good. I have to say, I love the movie, I love the book. There's nothing in the book where sometimes I'm reading and I'm like editing in my head. I'm like, oh, okay, cut this out. Like, why did you leave this in? There was nothing extra in it, and it was not lacking anything. It was just a perfect book. And I'm not typically a thriller type of person, but it was just so good. I'm also reading with a book club that I'm running on my various apps. The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. Very good. I mean, you don't need me to tell you that. But again, this sort of fairy tale with a twist adaptation, sort of a feminist spin. And it's kind of ironic because one of the videos that I'm working on is how I hate feminist spins on existing Hollywood IP because everybody's too lazy to come up with new narratives. So they're like, what if we make this again, but with a female lead? And they're like, we're going to make her a strong woman. Okay, calm down. But this is, I guess, before all of that happened. So it just reads different, you know? And also feminist doesn't mean that the woman wins in the end. Sometimes she doesn't win, she loses, and that is the point. It's a critique, you know. But anyways, I won't get too much into that because I can get intense. Future, who knows? I mean, I have 2 boxes in the packing process. I realized 2 boxes worth of things I have not read. Talk about overconsumption. I think Lolita is in my near future.
Very good. Yeah.
There's a lot of misunderstanding of that book online. I might make a video about that too. But we'll see. We'll see.
Perfect. Let's do some rapid fire book questions. So what's an important book that you don't see a lot of people talking about?
Oh, The Divine Comedy, of course. I mean, have you met me?
There we go. So speaking of that, what character in the Divine Comedy do you relate to most?
Oh, I think Dante himself. I am on a journey, you know.
All right. If you could add a new circle of hell into the Inferno, what would you punish?
I would punish people who like to make fun of other people's reading choices to make themselves look better.
Awesome answer. Favorite page turner of the year so far?
Anita Bruckner. Rules of Engagement. The Rules of Engagement. I was not expecting that. I read Hotel du Lac, which is supposed to be like her best book, whatever. And then I found this other book by her, and very little happens in that book. But she is so good in terms of plot, nothing happens. But she's just so good at writing interiority and like making you fascinated with the character. Like, why do they think the things that they think? She's so good. Anyways, that's it.
We'll make sure to add that book to the show notes as well. A book that challenged your worldview.
Very good question. I think recently, My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell, which is why I thought maybe Lolita is next, because it's a similar, very heart-wrenching story about abuse in the relationship between a teacher and a student. And I don't think I enjoy complex characters and like difficult topics, but I don't. Sometimes when it comes to super traumatic themes revolving around women, I just take a step back because I'm not always ready.
Yeah.
You know? But I read that and I was expecting to be put off, but I wasn't at all. It was a great book.
Well said. What modern book feels like it belongs in Inferno or Dante's Inferno?
Very interesting. I think there's a lot of West African writing that gives me sort of Dante vibes, like a lot of Chinua Achebe and some of his characters. I was recently like months ago, I was talking to somebody about A Man of the People, which is about this like young man who gets into politics in Nigeria, and meets like the older politician that he's been supporting and was very impressed by. And like when he meets him as a person, he sort of realizes how fallible he is and even corrupt, and he himself kind of gets wrapped up in this circle of and the sort of intoxicating experience of having some sort of power and status in society, and then realizing that he's falling farther and farther away from his principles and is himself becoming corrupted. And Dante Inferno is actually a lot about politics, which most people don't realize when starting to read it, and about like the struggle between knowing what kind of person you should be and sort of the constant temptation to just take the easy way and not stand up for what you believe in.
Perfect. And last question on the rapid fire: what's the best part of being a book content creator?
Ooh, I think making something and putting your thoughts out there and getting validation as a word gets thrown around a lot, but like validation in its most pure sense, as in somebody hears what you have to say and says either, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but I see what you're talking about. Like, it's very affirming to know that you're not crazy. That somebody that you've communicated, you've managed to commune across space and sometimes time. You know, people watch videos months later with somebody else who was thinking something, and you were able to like express that for them. Which is, I think, it's a big thing for me personally, because obviously this is not my first language, and I sometimes feel it's difficult for me to fully make myself understood and express the things that I'm thinking. So that feels great when that happens.
Love to hear it. The way we end this podcast is a two-sided question, but you can answer it however you want. The first part of it is, what would you like to see more of in the book world?
More community and more nuance.
Perfect. And on the other side, what would you like to see less of in the book world?
I would like to see fewer people trying to be influencers.
Interesting. Love to hear it. Well, thank you, Alina. Thank you for your time. Let us know what's coming up in your world, anything we can support, or where to find you on the internet.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Perfect. All right. Well, have a great rest of your day, and thank you again.
You too. Bye.